welcome to this week's Little Bite on the Uncovery Podcast. My name is Maddie, and I'm in recovery from anorexia, and I talk about it on this podcast. This morning, as I'm recording, what do we got in the coffee cup? Okay, I have to make a very, very dark confession. Sometimes when I don't want to go through the process of like grinding the beans, boiling the water, doing the French press, like having the entire sort of process of making coffee, and I still want like a warm coffee, I will just put instant coffee in like a glass container or whatever, with water, and just put it in the microwave and just like put it in for 4 minutes and that's how I just make hot coffee sometimes. And that's like, I feel like that's terrible, and anybody that probably knows anything about coffee, which I don't really, would be appalled. So that's what we're having this morning. And it tastes fine. Like it tastes fine if you have like, there's milk in it and like sweetener and stuff. So it tastes nice. Yeah. So like that's embracing imperfection in food and drink, but that might be like embracing imperfection to a level that's like shameful. Like we shouldn't, like we're really letting it slip at this point, but anyway, and it's in this cute little mug that has a broken handle, but I refuse to get rid of because it has my initial on it, and I got it from a really good friend. So I can't even carry the hot coffee like really that safely in this mug. We're just like a disaster on the coffee front this morning. But all right, today we're going to have a little bite about something that I was thinking about, obviously. And it, way back, my very first therapist in one of my first sessions that I ever had, she said to me, that she can pick out somebody with an eating disorder, specifically probably anorexia. And as a disclaimer, mostly that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is that, it's much easier to pick out somebody that has anorexia most of the time than another type of eating disorder. And that's a huge, huge problem. But it's a really interesting phenomenon, and the mental game of it is really, really interesting. That's why I want to talk about it. So this isn't for necessarily all eating disorders, and it's not all people that have them, but this has been my experience with this sort of, it takes one to know one. So my therapist, she said, with, all of the work that she does with people that have eating disorders, she can see them everywhere in the world. And I was really shocked by that at the time, because at that point I was like, well, certainly it's very well hidden. Like no one should be able to tell. They just think you're thin. And like you can pick them out in a crowd. And now I know this, right? Like, what it looks like, what the mannerisms are. Like it's obviously a look. Like once you know what it takes to maintain this particular level of emaciation, and that like 0.00001% of the population is actually naturally that thin, because it isn't as common as we think when we talk about like, oh, just like being naturally thin, they just are that way. They eat burgers all of the time. Like there are those people, they exist, but they're far more rare than I think most of us think. But so once you know kind of what this look is, and it's not even necessarily a weight thing, but it's these very particular things that basically anorexia does to a body, right? There's very particular things that arms look like and legs look like you know what it looks like. And if you're experiencing it, or you've had experiences with people that have eating disorders, you're able to pick them out a mile away. But it's actually more than the look. It's also an energy. It's mannerisms. It's where you're seeing people. It's spoiler. They're usually running. But the clothes that people wear, and sweaters in summer, and we've talked about sort of symptomology of eating disorders and things like that. But there's this energy and this look and these mannerisms that you only really know if you've been through it, and you have them too. So this idea of it takes one to know one. But I find that it comes up at a few different specific phases of eating disorders or recovery. And so it happens when you're in it and you still haven't admitted to yourself that you have it. And this is sort of when you'll find that it's noticed by others. So it's sort of like it takes one to know one, but the other way, where usually people that can recognize it have gone through it themselves or have experience with it. And these are usually the first people that end up sort of approaching you if they've recovered. So, for example, the very first person that ever sort of approached me at a time where I knew that I had an issue, like an actual eating disorder issue. She was a really, really good friend who had been through it. And that was sort of her laneway into starting that conversation. And she also was really, really aware that until someone's ready, they're not going to want to have the conversation. So what she did was she sort of just shared, what her experience had been. But it's sort of this, it takes one to know one. So you've been kind of caught out by somebody that's been through it. And then it becomes really hard to hide it from them if you still are wanting to hide it, because they know. So that's the first kind of place that it usually happens. But then when you're still in it, but you have it, you have an issue, you're playing comparison games with everybody you see, and you're able to pick out, where people are at. And it feels like this gross, like, comparison. I think this is the worst version of It Takes One to Know One, because then you're almost having a competition with everybody you see that probably has an eating disorder, or that is at least as thin as you think they must be to have this. And I remember this time in London, and I was at one of those, it's kind of like a Winners or like a Home Sense, like a discount store. And for the was it TJ Maxx? I think it must have been TJ Maxx in London. And there's this very particular section where there's food, and they have like sugar-free coffee sweetener, like those bottles of, the syrup that you put in your coffee. And they have a whole bunch of them. And I was there and I was looking for them, obviously. But there was this girl there, and she was like crouched down, just studying them so closely. And she didn't give a shit who could see her doing this sort of like intricate checking of all of these different bottles, where, me at that point, I was kind of like, okay, I was trying to at least be like, I don't know, covert and be like, okay, like, just like grab what you need and like move along. But I noticed her because she was sort of in the way, because she wouldn't, like, she was so unaware of anything around her. And she is one of the, like, kind of scariest people that I ever remember seeing in real life, like, still functioning, or, I mean, quote unquote functioning, but like being alive. So that kind of thing, where it's like you run into them in places where you have commonality, and you end up doing this comparison, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, she's doing the same thing as me, like I should be that thin, or something like that. So that's like I feel like that's a really kind of dangerous It Takes One to Know One phase. But then it sort of happens when you are, let's say you're in recovery, maybe you're kind of in a place where you're doing the things, but you're just not happy about it. I think about this period, I call this like the white knuckling, which has definitely been part of my recovery journey in the past, where like you're just like, you're doing it because you feel like you have to do it, but you're kind of mad. And now you're aware enough at that point that you really can pick them out a mile away, and you look around and you see it, but the feeling is, this isn't fair. Why do you get to stay skinny and keep your eating disorder, and no one's making you recover? And why do I have to be changing my behavior and, gaining weight or whatever? So that one is a weird one, because you're just like, this isn't fair. It's like this indignance where you're like, I can see that other people have them. Why do you get to keep your eating disorders? I want to keep mine. And so that's another place where this comes up. And then now, when you see someone that you can pick out kind of a mile away, but you're in recovery that you want, and this is where I am now, finally, where I'm like, I do not want this. I do not want to go back. I genuinely want to be well. you can still see them a mile away, but you have this experience of overwhelming empathy. And it's coupled with no desire to be them anymore because you know what it takes to do that. You know how brutal and painful and isolating and terrible it is to be in that place. And you're no longer like, oh, darn, I wish I was out for a run in 13 sweaters when it's 25 degrees outside, because boy, that was such a great time when I used to do that. And it makes me now very, very sad and just like, oh no, come on. I really, really hope that you don't want this sometime. I really hope that one day you no longer want to do this. So it feels like an incredibly salient marker of where you're at in your sort of eating disorder or recovery journey, in how you look at others, that you can kind of pick out and identify as having that. Like where your mental head game is super indicative of where you're at when you're doing that kind of that comparison, or that, I see. And then I guess the final chapter, which I'm not there yet, so I guess I didn't really think to include this one, but now that I'm thinking about it, now the it takes one to know one, once you're a recovered person, is probably like, that used to be me, and now I can always very clearly see it. I don't think you can unsee that. Once you've been through this, you're like, you just know the signs, the mannerisms. It's like it's a visible thing, but it's also like an energetic thing, and it's a behavioral thing. And yeah, you just know too much, and you can never kind of unsee it. So it takes one to know one. Actually, a lot of the examples that I have that come to mind actually happened when I was living in London. And I don't know if it's because where I was at with my eating disorder at that time was very, very chaotic. But I also think that there are just a lot of people with eating disorders in London. I mean, granted, there's just a lot more people. So you're going to have a lot more people that have eating disorders as well. But I remember thinking this is disproportionate. Again, my brain would be able to pick them out and find it disproportionate. But I found it was a lot of people that I would see out. And one time I was on the tube, and I wrote something about my experience, and I thought that I would share it. And this feels like more vulnerable than sharing all of my experience in recovery on this podcast, because I don't know if it's like poetry, but it's sort of like more prose than it is just me talking about it. But this feels very interesting to share. But more hesitant about this than sharing my very embarrassing ways of making coffee, for sure. But okay. I see you with the sunken cheeks and the sugar-free gum at 7 a.m, clutched in your mittened hand in the middle of this hot as hell tube car. I see you. You must be freezing. I know you are. I spotted you half a mile down the platform. It takes one to know one. I see you. And I see how everyone watches you pass. They are waiting for your legs to collapse beneath you. They aren't wrong. One day the weight of weightlessness will be too heavy. But not today. I know better. They used to watch me too. Sometimes I can't decide if I miss that. You do this every day. I see them. They whisper and watch. You probably don't notice. You're probably too tired. Or you're busy calculating the 5 pieces of 2.5 calorie gum you've had today and kicking yourself. You must be so scared. I get it. I see you. I was you. In a lot of ways, I still am you. And the thoughts, the most horrific trains of thought, the ones I can't quite fully derail, the trains I hop onto when I don't know any other transport route, the ones that get louder when I see you, because I do. I see you. I want to throw myself in front of you, protect you, band together. Anorexics unite. It's not her fault, I would scream. It wouldn't be very British. They'd probably deport me. One day I won't want to be you. So for now, I see you. I am with you. I don't have the answer either, but I know this ain't it. So that's what I wrote when I saw a takes one to know one young lady in a tube car in London when I was commuting to work or school or something, but it stuck out to me as a memory. And so then I wrote that years ago, and yeah, so now I'm sharing it today. So that's all that I want to talk about on this little bite. I hope that you have a most wonderful week, and we'll see you on the next episode.